This is a Sikha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek Zayin, Parshas Tazria and Parshas-Hachodesh, and the topic of the Sikha is that in some years Parshas-Hachodesh falls out on Parshas Tazria, and there are 6 parts in the Sikha. The Rebbe will number 1 ask that Parshas Tazria and Parshas-Hachodesh seem to express opposite ideas. Number 2, present and connect 2 teachings on the pasuk of Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem Reish Chodashim Rishon Hu Lochem L'Chodshei Hashana. Number 3, ask 2 questions on this. Number 4, explain a deeper understanding of this inyan. Number 5, based on this deeper understanding, answer the 2 questions. And number 6, based on this, answer our original question. Shabbos Parshas Hachodesh sometimes falls out, as it does in this year, on Shabbos Parshas Tazria. Now, all matters of the Torah are precise, and so from this it's understood that since these 2 parshas come together, it indicates that they share a common idea. Because if they didn't share a common idea, then Teres Emes wouldn't combine them. And there's a difficulty over here, because at first glance, it seems that not only don't they share a common idea, but to the contrary, they are actually opposite ideas. On one end we have Parshas Hachodesh. Now Parshas Hachodesh is named after the pasuk of Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem Reish Chodashim, referring to Chodesh Nisan. And the inyan of Chodesh Nisan is Chodesh Hagula, the way it comes entirely Milmaila. As Razal explained that the pasuk of Kol Deidi Hine Zeba Medalig, which is all Milmaila, because it says Hine Zeba, and in a manner of Dilug, it refers to the Gula of Chodesh Nisan, which means that it was all within the Sarissa de Le'ela. And this is actually the reason that the whole parsha is named Parshas Hachodesh, even though only one pasuk speaks of Hachodesh, while the rest of the pasukim speak about the dinim of the Korban Pesach. The reason it's called Hachodesh is because the Korban Pesach is named for the Opasach Hashem, which symbolizes the Geula, which comes in the form of a dilug from Lamaila. It's all Milmaila. It was Nigla Aleim Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Geolam, which this idea that it comes entirely Milmaila, which is found in the Korban Pesach, is the very same idea as we explained of Hachodesh, the month of Nisan, which is the Chodesh HaGeula, the Geula which came entirely Milmaila. Whereas Parshas Tazria, which is Loshen Nekeva, as it says beforehand that this is a case of Isha Ki Tazria, is as the Alter Rebbe explains the Maimar Razal of Ish Mazria Tchila Yeledis Nekeva and Isha Mazras Tchila Yeledis Zacher. The Alter Rebbe explains that Ish and Isha alludes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael. And when Ish Mazria Tchila, meaning that Hashem awakens a Yid to Avodas Hashem, then it's Yeledis Nekeva, meaning that the Avodah isn't the Bas Kayama, like Noshim that died on Kala, that they easily change their mind. However, when Isha Mazras Tchila, meaning that the Avodah begins with the Serusa Tato, that it starts from the Avodah Sa'adam, not from above, so then you let the Zacher, meaning that the Avodah is a Bas Kayama. And according to this, the idea of Isha Ki Tazria, talking about Parshas Tazria, reflects the Avodah Sa'adam specifically through Serusa Tato, unlike a Chodesh, which comes Milmaila. So not only don't Parshas Hachodesh and Parshas Tazria seem to be connected, they actually seem to express opposite ideas. In order to understand this, we're going to move on to a side discussion. So on the pasuk of Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem Reish Chodashim, so there are a number of explanations. Among them are the Pshat. So on the level of Pshat, the Even Ezra explains the difference between a Chodesh, a month, and Shana, and a year. When we look at the movement of the moon, so there's no concept of a Shana. There's no such thing as a year by the moon. The movement of the moon is only related to the division of months. Each month, which is 29 and a half plus days, the moon makes a full cycle. And this is talking about a cycle in its relationship with the sun and the earth. And then there's a new moiled of the moon. On the other hand, by the movement of the sun, there's no such concept of a Chodesh. The cycle of the sun is around 365 and a quarter days, which creates the changes of the seasons. And the pasuk of Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem Reish Chodashim refers to the counting of the months, which is connected to the moon. And it's teaching us that it starts from the first month, which is the month of Nisan, whereas the Rosh Hashanah of years, which is connected to the sun, is from Tishrei. So this is the explanation of the pasuk in the way of Pshat that's given by the Even Ezra. Another explanation that's given, and this is in the way of Medrash. So on the level of Medrash, Chazal teach on this pasuk that Mishabachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'ilama, when Hashem chose His world, so then Kava Be'Rosh Chodashim V'Shanim, then He established Rosh Chodesh and years. Ucheshabachar Be'Yaakov Uvanov, and when Hashem chose Yaakov and his sons, meaning the Yidden, Kava Be'Rosh Chodesh Shal Gula, then He established Rosh Chodesh of Geula. And the Baal HaKeda explains the difference between Bachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'elamei and Bachar Be'Yakov Uvanav. The difference is that Bachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'elamei refers to the Anhoga Tivis in creation, the way that Hashem runs the world based on nature, based on Teva. And the Rosh Hashanah of this Anhoga is Tishrei. And the Bachar B'Yakov Uvanav refers to the Anhoga Nisus, the miraculous way that Hashem deals with the world, where He's overriding Teva, He overrides nature, which Hashem does for Yidden Yaakov Uvanav. And the Reish of this Anhoga is Nisan. So in Pshat, years are connected to Tishrei and months are connected to Nisan. And in Medrash, Teva, nature, is connected to Tishrei, and Nisan, miracles, are connected to Nisan. Now, as we know, all explanations of Razal on the same pasuk have a connection between one another. And so to here, these two inyanim, the one that we learn in Pshat and the one that we learn in Medrash, are connected with one another. Because the Anhogas HaTeva, which is what the Medrash talks about, is that of Lo Yishbaisu, that it's constant without a change. And this is similar to the movement of the sun, which doesn't have any change, which is the explanation given in Pshat. And so Tishrei is connected both to Teva and to the sun. And they're connected to one another because Teva is constant without a change, and also the movement of the sun is constant without a change. And this is actually similar to the explanation that Shana, the word Shana, is from the Lashon of Mishnah, which means to repeat, because it repeats the same thing over and over again. Whereas on the other hand, the Hanogan Nisus is an inyan of Chiddush. It's something which is novel, something out of the ordinary, that sometimes Hashem overrides the Anhogas HaTeva for a period of time. And so this is similar to the moon, which also the moon changes from day to day, and it's Nischadish every month. So we see that the explanation in the Medrash, that it talks about Hanogan Nisus, fits with the explanation in Pshat, that it's talking about the moon, because both of them have this element, this inyan of Chiddush. However, we have to understand, and there are two questions here. The first question is, the pasuk says two inyanim. It says, number one, Hachodesh hazeh lachem reish chadashim, and number two, it says that it's rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana. It mentions both chadashim and shana, meaning that the month of Nisan is not just reish chadashim, but rather it's also rishon l'chodshei hashana. It's the first not just for the months, but also for the years. And this is difficult, because since it's talking about the inyan of Chodesh, which as we said is connected to the moon, and we know that the moon doesn't have years, so how do we say that Nisan is the Rishon also in regards to the inyanim of Shana? L'chayra Nisan only fits with the inyanim of Chodesh. And the second question is, on the other hand, also by Mishabachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Be'elamai, when Hashem chose the world, which is connected, like we said, to Tishrei, it mentions not just that Kava by Rosh Hashanim, but rather also Rosh Chadashim. And seemingly, l'chayra, how does the inyan of Chodesh, which is a Chiddush, which is the idea of a Nes, come into creation? We learned that Tishrei is the idea of Teva, which is connected to the sun, and we learned that only Nisan is the idea of Nes, which is connected to the moon. So as a result of these questions, we have to say, and this is also going to lead into the answer, that even though generally Tishrei is connected to Teva, which is the inyan of Shana, of the year, which goes by the sun, and Nisan with Nes, which is connected to Chodesh, that goes by the moon, but nevertheless there is a skalalos, there is a combination between them. Meaning to say that also in the creation itself, in the Bria, before the Bachar B'Yakov Uvanav, which on its own is the inyan of Teva and Shana, but also there is an inyan of Nes, which is the inyan of Chodesh. And the opposite is also true, meaning that the Chiddush of Bachar B'Yakov Uvanav is not just expressed in Anhoga Nisus, which is connected to the Chodesh, the month and the moon, but also in the change it creates in the Anhoga Tivis, which is the inyan of Shana, of the sun. So the idea that we just presented is going to lead into an extensive, very long explanation, which is going to lead into answering the questions that we had over here. And then based on that, we're going to be able to answer the original question. So in order to understand this idea of this iskalos that there is, we have to first explain the teichen pnimis, the inner meaning, the inner idea, and the kavana pnimis, and the inner purpose, and these two anagos of Teva and Nes. So both of them are needed to fulfill the purpose of creation and reveal Hashem's greatness. And the difference between them is, the purpose of the Anhoga Nisus is to reveal the bligvul of Elokus. Its purpose is to reveal how Hashem is entirely higher than the world. And this is experienced in the world through the bittul of its metzias. that the Nes overrides the rules of Teva, which shows how Teva is insignificant relative to the Bli Gvul of Elikus. So the purpose of Hanaga Nisus is to reveal the Bli Gvul of Elikus, and it's done through the miracle overriding the whole Hanaga of Teva. And the purpose of Hanaga Tivis is to reveal how Hashem enclothes himself in the world, so that also the Metzias of the world is miyuchad with Hashem. It reveals that also the laws of Teva are Hanaga Likis. So the Hanaga Tivis reveals how even the Metzias of the world is one with Hashem. Now, since the world was created b'shvil HaTorah u'b'shvil Yisrael, so we must say that everything that's in the creation depends on the Aveda of Yidden. And so from this is understood that not only the Hanaga Nisus, which is connected to Bachar B'Yakov B'Banov, depends on the Aveda of Yidden, but rather also the Bachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Be'elamai, which is the Hanaga Tivis, depends on the Aveda of Yidden, because each of them have a purpose, and that purpose has to be accomplished and fulfilled through the Yidden. Now, how does the Aveda of Yidden accomplish each of these purposes? So each of these Hanagas depends on the Avedas Adam that's similar to it, which in general, Avedas Hashem is divided into two types. There are two types of Avedas Hashem. One is that a Yid must have the Aveda of Kabbalas Eil and Mesiras Nefesh, meaning that a Yid has to serve Hashem not as a result of understanding and feelings, but rather to fulfill the Ratzon Elyon with Bittul. And when serving Hashem in this way, one's Aveda isn't measured based on the Medidus V'Akbalas of one's Metzias, because the person is not serving Hashem from their Metzias. They're serving Hashem from a place of Kabbalas Eil and Mesiras Nefesh. And this type of Aveda awakens and inspires the Hanaga Nisus, which affects the Bittul in the world. Because that's what it's doing in the person. It's the bittul of the person's metzias. So it's ma'er the Hanaga Nisus, which brings a bittul into the world. However, on the other hand, also the metzias of a person, which is the b'chol avavcha and b'chol nafshecha, that too must be permeated with avodas Hashem. A person can't leave their metzias out of their serving of Hashem. And therefore, a person must fulfill Torah mitzvahs not just with Kabbalas El, but rather also with understanding and feeling. And the Hanaga Tivis depends on this type of Aveda, which unites the Metzias of the world with Elikus. Like we said, that the idea of Hanaga Tivis is to show that the Metzias of the world is miyuchad with Hashem, and so too in the Aveda of a Yid, to show that the Metzias of a person is miyuchad with their Avedas Hashem. Now, the Tachlis HaKavana is that there should be the Ichud of Nes and Teva. What does this mean? So this that Nes and Teva are two separate Hanagas is only from the perspective of Eiris and Giluyim. In Eiris and Giluyim there are two Kavim. There's one Kav of Bli Gvul, which comes down in Hanaga Nisus, and then there's one Kav of Koyach HaGvul, which comes down in Hanagas HaTeva. However, from the perspective of Yechelis HaAtzmos, so they are both Bli Gvul and Gvul, they aren't two Kavim, but rather they are one Inyan, which is the expression of Hashem's Shleimus. Like the well-known teaching that Im Teimer Sheyesh Lekoyach Bli Gvul Ve'en Lekoyach B'Gvul Atem Echatzer Shleimusei. So both of them are really just an expression of Hashem's Shleimus, and therefore the Kavanos Abriya of Atzmos is fulfilled in the Ichud of Nes and Teva, and not in how they're two separate Kavim. And the same is true in Avodas Adam. A Yid must make the Ichud of the two types of Aveda, which is the Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh and Kabbalas Eil, which is higher than Tavadas, and the Aveda with one's Koyches Pnimim. And this is accomplished through awakening the Etzem HaNeshama, which from its perspective, both types of Aveda are not opposites, but to the contrary, Adrabah. They are in Achdus with one another. So the Tachlis HaKavana is the Ichud of Nes and Teva, and the Ichud of these two types of Aveda, of Mesiras Nefesh and Kabbalas Eil, and of Aveda with the Koyches Pnimim. Now, since in essence and in their source, Nes and Teva are one Inyan, so it's understood that also the way they come down in the world, where they seem like opposite Hanagas of Nes and of Teva, they're really in their Pnimius one. And this is expressed in that also in Teva itself, there's the characteristic of higher than Teva, as we'll see, and so too the Inyan of Nes is connected also with Anhaga of Teva, as we'll see. The explanation of this is there are two ways a person can come to see and recognize Hashem in the Anhagas of Teva. The first way is that through thinking about the Anhaga of the creation, the movement of the Mazalis, etc., one comes to realize that there must be a Balabayas who runs everything. As the Rambam writes regarding Avraham Avinu, that this is how he came to realize that there's an Eibishter running the world. And the second way is through thinking about the Lo Yishbaisu, how everything continues without any change. So one comes to realize that such a continuity, without any shinui, without any change, cannot come from the creation, which the creation on its own is hoivev and nifsad, and they're full of shinui, full of change. And it even can't come from the Erliki, which is in the world, because it relates to the world, and it's not shaykh to be without any change, without any shinui. But rather it's a koyach ha'ein seif, which was put into the Nagas Teva. So it comes out that in Teva itself, there is the Lamaylim in Teva, the Loisha Nisi of Ein Seif Baruch Hu. So because in truth, Teva and Nes are one thing, so even now we're able to see an indication of this, an expression of this in Teva, that there is an element of Nes in Teva, there's an element of the Koyach Ein Seif, which is higher than Teva, which is expressed in the Lo Shanisi of Lo Yishbaisu. And according to this, we could answer one of our questions. So this is the explanation of the Maimer Chazal of Mishabachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'elamai Kaveh Be'Rosh Chodashim V'Shanim. That even though it speaks about Eilamai, it still mentions the Rosh Chodashim, which is connected to Nes. So the explanation is, from the words of Chazal, it's understood that it's not talking about the state of Eilamai from the standpoint of creation. Rather, it's talking about when Hashem is Beicher the world. It doesn't say Mishabara Kodesh Baruch Hu Seilamai. It says Mishabachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Beilamai, similar to the Bachar Be'Yakov Ivanov. And it's specifically from that Bechira that Kaveh Be'Rosh Chodashim V'Shanim. It's an addition to what's in the world on its own. Because you could really ask over here, it's not understood. Since the Inyan of Rosh Chodashim V'Shanim is the natural order that Hashem established in creation, if so, it's a part of the creation. So how do we say that it comes from Bachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'elamai, something higher than the creation on its own? And the explanation is that as a result of Bachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'elamai, which real Bechira is only in Atzmus, so therefore Teva and higher than Teva are one Inyan. And therefore there is in Teva itself also the Milmailim and Teva, the eternity of Ani Avai Leishanisi. That's an element that's higher than Teva. And this is the meaning of Mishabachar Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'elamai Kaveh Be'Rosh Chodashim V'Shanim. This refers to the Nes, the Chodesh, which is in the Inyan of Teva, which is expressed in the Inyan of Shana, from, like we said, the Lashon of Mishnah, that it repeats itself over and over again without any change. And this is the Inyan of there not being any Shinui, which is the expression of Nes, of Chodesh, of Chidush in Teva. Now, just like in Teva, there's higher than Teva, so the same is true on the opposite side. The Anhaga Nisis is not mugbal in the Kav of Nes, which expresses the bligvul of Elikus. Rather, it also has the inyan that it transforms Teva, meaning that Teva itself should reflect the Anhaga Elikus. Therefore, there are also a type of Nisim which are melubish in Teva. And these Nisim have two opposite aspects. On one hand, it's a Nes which is higher than Teva, just like the Nisim that are not Melubish in Teva. Like the Psak Din, that we say the same bracha of She'asa Nisim by Chanukah, which was a Nes which was not Melubish in Teva, and by Purim we say the same bracha which was a Nes which was Melubish in Teva. However, on the other hand, the Nes itself, which is higher than Teva, comes down and is Melubish in Teva and causes that the Anhagas Teva itself should behave itself Kirtsoine Dafka Kegarzin Biyada Chaitzev. And so that's the idea that Teva itself should reflect on Hogelikis, meaning to say that also the Anhoganisis, which is higher than Teva, has the characteristic of Teva, because a Nes doesn't rule over Teva in a way that it overrides Teva, but rather through a Nes, the Teva becomes elevated to be Lamayla Mena Teva. So also in the Anhoganisis, we have the Maila that there is in the Anhogativis. And this answers our other question about why it says about Chodesh Nisan, HaChodesh Azal Lachem Rish Chodashim, and then it says Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana. So this is the reason why Nisan is not just Rish Chodashim, but rather also Rishon L'Chodshei Hashana, the Inyan of Teva. This is because the tachlis of the Anhoga Nisis of Nisan is to transform the Anhoga Tivis Shana, that also in Teva it should be felt that it's controlled by Nisan, the Lamayla Mena Teva, which is where we see the Ichud of in the Anhoga Nisis is also the Maila of what's accomplished through the Anhoga Tivis. According to all this, we will also understand the connection between Parshas Hachodesh and Parshas Tazria. The difference between Hachodesh and Tazria is similar to the difference between Nes and Teva. Hachodesh, which reflects the Gilul Milmaila, like we said, it's the Inyan of V'Serusta de Le'elo, is higher than creation, similar to the Inyan of Nes. And Tazria, which reflects the Avedas Hamata, which we said is the Serusta de Lotato, is connected with the Metzias of the person, similar to the Inyan of Teva. And when Parshas Hachodesh falls on Parshas Tazria, it emphasizes and reminds us that they are b'pnimius one inyan, and this will be in a revealed way la'asad lavei, when the yud, the promise of ish v'ish yulad ba, will be fulfilled. It will be ish, meaning ish mazriat chila, the advantage that is in Hachodesh, which comes milmaila nes, and at the same time it will also be ish and then it'll be v'ish yulad bo. The yulad is zocher, the advantage which is in Tazria, which is teva, that of a Sarusla little tata. So we'll have both the advantage of ish, which is the union of a Sarusla the le'elo, the milmaila, the nes, and v'ish yulad bo, which is the milo of a Sarusla the tata, that it's milmato, the union of teva.